I want to give you some background on what's been going on this week. First, a little bit of recap on the trip that I took to the Middle East last week. A big debate about student loans this week, and also want to acknowledge the tragedy of the train wreck and fire in Quebec, and talk a little bit about Maine's involvement in that, which was heroic, to say the least. First, the trip. Last week, as you may know, from Sunday night to Friday morning, I was in the Middle East, in the countries of Turkey and Jordan, and it was all about what's going on in Syria. I was with Senator Carl Levin, who's the chair of the Armed Services Committee, and the two of us met with public officials in both countries, Turkey and Jordan, foreign affairs. We met with the chief of staff to the King of Jordan. We met with the foreign policy people in Turkey. We met with our own intelligence people, military people in both countries. We also, I think most importantly, met with people from Syria who were involved in the struggle against Assad. In fact, the first night we were there, we had a long private dinner with General Idris, who is the leader of the opposition forces attempting to get rid of the Assad regime. So we talked with him. Then we went to refugee camps and talked to people who had to flee Syria because of Assad's brutality, learned about what they're going on. We talked to some of the people that are in the Syrian opposition army. It's important to understand a couple of things. And by the way, I start here very cautious and reluctant about getting us involved in Syria. It is very complicated. It's a very difficult problem. So the first question I asked on the trip is there a U.S. national interest at stake here that would justify some level of involvement? I concluded that there is. Number one, this struggle is already destabilizing two of our most important allies in the region, Turkey and Jordan. It also threatens Israel, it threatens Lebanon, and that's number one. Number two, if Assad stays, Iran will be in charge. Assad is really a client of Iran at this point, and they're funding him, and Russia is also funding him. So that's really who's behind this war from his point of view at this point. And clearly it's not in our interest for Iran to increase their influence all the way to the Mediterranean. Third, there really are weapons of mass destruction in Syria. There really are chemical weapons. We know that. There's no doubt about it. And what happens to those weapons, either if Assad stays or if he goes, is of very significant importance to us. We don't want those weapons to fall into the hands of Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization out of Lebanon, or Al-Qaeda, or al-Nusra, which are terrorist organizations that are involved in the Syrian opposition. So that in itself is a reason for us to at least have some involvement to protect our direct national interests. Now, I should say at the outset that neither I nor Senator Levin nor anybody else, including the people over there, has any interest whatsoever in American troops going into Syria. Nobody asked for it. They didn't want it. In fact, they actively said, we don't want American troops. That would just change the nature of the war. I'm certainly not in favor of that, and I can't imagine circumstances where I would support it. What I do support is our calling together a coalition of countries from Europe and Gulf states and Middle Eastern states, Arab and Muslim states, who are all opposed to Assad, to try to coordinate the response on behalf of those who want to get Assad out. Right now it's a little bit chaotic. There are lots of countries involved, 9, 10, or 11 countries, but there's no real organization or leadership. And the one thing everyone asked us for, both in Turkey and in Jordan and from the Syrian opposition, was leadership. They want us to try to bring, the term they used, interestingly enough, was they said, we want you to quarterback this thing. And I thought it was funny that these folks from the Middle East were using an American football analogy, but they said, we need a quarterback, somebody to coordinate the response. So that is sort of where Senator Levin and I took from this trip. It was an amazing experience. You can sit here in Washington and get briefings and see slides and all that kind of thing, but being there to meet the people, to meet the refugees, to talk to the kids, and really get a feel for what's going on over there, which, by the way, is a humanitarian catastrophe. This guy Assad, his idea of a war is to surround a town where there's opposition forces and basically destroy the town, everybody, men, women, children, hospitals, schools, and bombard them with artillery and tanks. It's unbelievably brutal. 100,000 people have been killed. Several million refugees have had to flee the country, and it's a terrible situation. So there's a humanitarian aspect to this as well that I think it's important that we make some contribution to. So that's a bit of the story of the trip. It was, as I say, an amazing experience. It was exhausting, but it certainly helped me as a member of the committees that I'm on to understand the situation better and to try to help find our way to a sensible policy that will help determine a good outcome, but not entangle us either financially or certainly in human terms. So that's the road that we're trying to walk. Student loans has been a big discussion this week. As you know, on July 1st, a portion of the student loan rates jumped from 3.4% back up to 6.8%, where the rest of the loans have been right along. And so there's been a lot of talk about it. The Democrats had a proposal basically to extend the current situation for a year, and there's about a $4 billion cost to do that, and they had a tax change in order to fund that. I voted against that, along with Joe Manchin of West Virginia and the Republicans, because I came here to solve problems, not postpone them. It's as simple as that. And this is simply a postponement, and it's a postponement on top of a postponement. The real deadline was a year ago in July, and there was a postponement then for a year, and now here we are a year later, and still not much has been done, and I can't see what's going to change between now and next year. The composition of the Senate's not going to change. The facts of the loan program aren't going to change. The only thing that's going to change is it's going to be an election year, which I think is going to make it even harder to solve it. So I've been pushing and working along with Joe Manchin and a guy named Tom Carper, Democratic senator from Delaware, working with a small group of Republicans to try to come up with a bipartisan solution that's not just a postponement, but is a long-term solution. And we've got a plan. We've been discussing it with leaders on both sides, and we feel like we're close to something that will be satisfactory to both sides and can be a long-term solution to this problem. But right now it's sort of pending running some numbers and getting the details. But the bottom line is I'm interested in a long-term solution that will benefit students rather than a postponement that, by the way, at current rates, 6.8% or even at 3.4%, the students are paying too much. And I don't see why we should continue a situation where 2/3 of the students, which are in the 6.8 rate anyway, are way overpaying the government. And our plan basically reduces the level to whatever the government's cost of borrowing is, plus a little bit to pay for the cost, the risks of the loans and the cost of administration. That, to me, is a logical long-term solution. And over the last few days, we've negotiated a cap into this plan, so no matter what happens, the rates won't go above a certain level. I think that will make people feel a lot better, so they're not totally at the mercy of the market. But basically, we have a plan that we think will give students the lowest possible rate of anywhere in the society, and would actually, in the next few years, for sure, lower everybody's rates substantially. So right now, it's sort of up in the air. The postponement option failed, so now it's a question it really comes down to a very straightforward question. Are we going to try to come up with a better plan, or are we just going to stick with what we have, which is 6.8% fixed, which is way above where it ought to be in terms of the government's cost of borrowing, and it has the students, in effect, subsidizing the federal government, which I just don't think we should do. So we're working hard on this, and hopefully next week we'll try to find a solution, although next week is going to be involved in some rule changes and some pretty hot discussions between the two parties about the filibuster. So I'm hoping that the student loan issue won't get all tangled up in that, but it's always possible. Finally, I just want to touch for a minute on the tragedy in Quebec. Huge derailment, as you know. It was essentially a runaway train caught on fire, destroyed a downtown of a small town in Quebec. About 40 firefighters from Maine, from Rangeley and other areas of Maine, heeded the call, went north, and were absolutely heroic, literally heroic, in helping those people to fight what was an incredibly dangerous and destructive fire. And I'm just, when I started reading the accounts of what those people did, I was really moved by it, and want to find some way to honor and thank those firefighters from Maine. They're true first responders, and we often forget about how important it is to have people there at the end of that line when you have a tragedy, and they really responded in great shape up in northern Maine and southern Quebec. So that's what's been going on this week. We're going to get back next week, hopefully, to school loans and also into this filibuster thing, and I'll talk about that more next week when we see how it actually comes out. Thanks.